For 300 years, the world hasn't run on money. It's been running on something far more fragile, a promise that can never be kept. Today, global sovereign debt has crossed $315 trillion, a number so large it doesn't just exceed the world's GDP, it exceeds our imagination. Your savings, your salary, your retirement, all of it is silently tied to that impossible number, a number built on a system that was never designed to be repaid. We like to believe money is wealth, that currency represents value, that when we work, save, or invest, we're building a future. But what if I told you that the bills in your pocket aren't wealth at all? They're claims, IOUs, debt issued by someone else and passed into your hand like a ticking clock. This is not an accident. This is not a bug. It is the system. A system engineered more than 3 centuries ago in London. A system that hijacked the world's financial history and turned sovereign nations into permanent debtors. This is the story of the debt mechanism that hijacked financial history. And if you think this doesn't affect you, ask yourself, if the entire global economy runs on unpayable promises, then what exactly are you working for? Return to the origin. To understand the machine, we must go back to 1694, a moment of desperation, a kingdom on the brink, a king in need of money, not tomorrow, but immediately. England was exhausted. Decades of war had drained the treasury. The crown was bankrupt in all but name. Gold was gone. Silver was disappearing. Taxes could not keep up with the costs of empire. And in that moment of weakness, a new class of power brokers stepped forward. Creditors, merchants, goldsmiths, London's emerging financial elite, men with capital, but more importantly, men with a vision. They approached King William III with an offer that would change the world. Allow us to create a bank, a private bank. We will lend you the money you need, not in gold, but in notes, paper, promises. In exchange, they demanded something unthinkable: the right to issue money not backed by gold, but backed by the government's debt. Thus, the Bank of England was born, not as a public institution, not as a national treasure, but as a private engine, a machine whose fuel was debt and whose output was money. This was the birth of fractional reserve banking. The silent architecture of power. Fractional reserve banking is simple, almost too simple. You deposit 100, the bank keeps 10, and it lends out 90. But that 90 doesn't leave the system. It becomes another deposit, which can be lent again, and again, and again. From $100 of real money, the system creates $900 of promises. Money becomes debt, debt becomes money, and the cycle repeats, expanding endlessly. The brilliance of the system is that it multiplies wealth, but only for those who control the lending. The danger is that it multiplies obligations for everyone else. In 1694, sovereignty shifted, not to Parliament, not to the people, but to those who controlled credit. The early central bankers had discovered something profound. When you control debt, you control the future. When you control money, you control the present. But when you control both, you control history. And so began the silent revolution, the transfer of power from kings to creditors, from states to banks, from citizens to the engine of debt. Motives hidden in plain sight. Why did this system spread? Because it solved a problem every empire faced. War is expensive. Expansion is costly. Maintaining power requires endless resources. Debt became the perfect weapon, the perfect tool, the perfect illusion. You could fund wars without raising taxes. You could expand empires without having gold. You could build nations on borrowed time. For rulers, it was irresistible. For bankers, it was paradise. A system where money could be created from thin air, yet repaid with real labor by generations who never agreed to it. Fractional reserve banking wasn't just a financial innovation, it was a political revolution, a shift in control that rewired the world. But the true genius of the system lies not in its creation, but in its repetition. Because once a society begins using debt as money, a cycle begins. A cycle that every major empire has followed, from Britain to America. A cycle that always ends the same way. But the question isn't whether the cycle will repeat. The real question is, how far along the cycle are we today? The pattern of empires. History reveals a repeating cycle, not random, not accidental, but predictable. The debt cycle of empires has 7 stages. Foundation, a stable currency backed by real assets. Expansion, credit fuels growth, innovation, conquest. Euphoria, debt becomes normal, prosperity feels permanent. Overextension, wars, welfare, or speculation stretch the system. Financialization, the economy becomes dominated by banks and debt. Inflation or collapse, currency weakens, promises outweigh reality. Reset, default, devaluation, or revolution, the cycle restarts. Now watch how this pattern played out. Spain, the empire of silver. Spain flooded Europe with New World silver. Wealth seemed infinite. Debts were cheap. Wars were easy to fund. But silver isn't value, it's a commodity. Once the supply surged, its price collapsed. Spain defaulted 4 times in 80 years. Stage 7, reset. France, the paper money experiment. In the early 1700s, France embraced paper money. John Law promised prosperity through credit. It worked, until it didn't. When people realized the paper wasn't worth the promises behind it, the system imploded. Riots, collapse, reset. Britain, the master of debt. Britain perfected the debt engine, the Bank of England, gilts, war bonds. The Industrial Revolution powered by credit. But even Britain could not escape the cycle. By 1944, the pound lost its dominance. By 1971, the dollar replaced it. Stage 6, decline. United States, the final empire. And now, we arrive at the modern world. The United States inherited the system and amplified it beyond anything the British could imagine. 1944, Bretton Woods. The dollar becomes the world's reserve currency. 1971, Nixon shock. The dollar detaches from gold. Debt becomes the only backing. 1980s, Volcker shock. Interest rates skyrocket to save the currency. 2020 to present, the era of infinite liquidity. Money printing on a scale unseen in human history. The debt engine is no longer just humming, it is roaring. Today, the U.S. sits firmly in Stage 5, financialization, the stage where everything becomes a product: mortgages, student loans, derivatives, futures, your data, your life, your time. Banks no longer serve the economy, The economy serves the banks. You can feel it. You live in it. You breathe it. Housing prices rising faster than wages, savings losing value. Every crisis solved with more debt. This is not a mistake. This is not mismanagement. This is the pattern. And if every previous empire collapsed after reaching stage 5, what does that say about the present? What does that say about the future? Because once an empire relies on debt to survive, collapse becomes not just possible, but inevitable. The only question is, where are we in the final stage? History does not move backward. Once the debt engine reaches maximum velocity, the sequence is locked in. Every promise must be paid. Every debt must be rolled over. Every currency must eventually face its reckoning. But here's the paradox. Debt can grow forever. People cannot. Countries cannot. Empires cannot. The system will not collapse because people made mistakes. It will collapse because it was designed to expand beyond reality. We live in the age of infinite debt, an age where money is not created by nations, but by creditors, an age where central banks dictate the future and governments exist to service interest payments, an age where your savings lose value not by theft, but by design. But you still have a choice. You can watch the cycle repeat, or you can learn the pattern, understand the mechanism, prepare for the reset. Because a storm is coming, not tomorrow, not next week, but inevitably. And when it comes, only those who understand the architecture of debt will recognize the signs before the world does. History doesn't repeat perfectly, but it rhymes. The question is, are you listening to the rhyme? If you've stayed with us until now, thank you for watching this chapter of Shadow Financial Historia. This channel is dedicated to exposing the hidden patterns, the silent mechanisms, and the financial decisions that shaped the world you live in today. If you found value in this documentary, consider subscribing, sharing, and leaving a comment. Every engagement helps this research reach more viewers who are searching for answers in a world built on shadows. More investigations are coming, more patterns will be revealed, and more history will be uncovered. This is Shadow Financial Historia.